Chapter 13 Manhattan, Part 1. Twilight focused on a spot on the far side of the grate, about to begin her second nightly excursion out of her cell. Her ears perked at the sound, and she dropped her gaze to the wall beneath the grate. She waited, listening. Nothing. Her brows furrowing in agitation, she focused outside again and reached for her spell. Before she wasted the spell, Twilight pushed it to the edge of her mind instead of casting it.
"Spike, do you hear that?"
she hissed. "Yep," Spike answered from within her dim cell, his voice loud in her primed hearing. Twilight wearily stepped back from the wall as the sounds continued, growing with each passing moment.
"Hey, girls,"
Twilight said, calling over the noise.
"What's going on in there, Twilight?"
Rainbow answered.
"No idea,"
Twilight said. She backed away from the wall until her tail brushed the bars of her cell's door. Spike gave her a small wave and disappeared. The sounds built to a crescendo, scraping and rumbling. Her ears flattened back. Instinctively, she reached for her swords and immediately felt foolish for trying. As a precaution, she cast a spell to activate her mage armor. The moment the spell completed, the noise suddenly stopped. Twilight listened intently, her eyes scanning the wall of her cell.
"Maybe it's gone?"
Fluttershy murmured from the cell behind her. A blue aura lit a single stone in the wall and had slowly slid into the cell. Twilight smiled.
"Or maybe it's Rarity."
"Rarity?"
Rainbow cried.
"Oh, it's about time. I can't wait to get out of here."
The stone slid completely free and thumped onto the floor of Twilight's cell. A blue light shined through the hole.
"Twilight?"
Rarity's voice caressed her ears, sweeter than she could have imagined.
"Rarity!"
Twilight said, and rushed towards the hole in the wall. "Oh, thanks, Celestia," Applejack said from her cell.
"Twilight!"
Pinkie called, bursting with excitement. Twilight crouched down in front of the hole and peered through it, lighting her own horn. On the far side, Pinkie's smiling face filled her field of view.
"Hey, Pinkie!"
Twilight said with a grin.
"Twilight, step away from the wall,"
Rarity said.
"Right,"
Twilight said as she backed away.
"Are you clear?"
Twilight pressed up against the bars, ready to protect herself with her magic if need be.
"As clear as I can be."
Rarity began an incantation.
"She's casting a scroll,"
Twilight realized. She recognized the spell as a relatively simple silence. Most unicorns couldn't even manage that much, but Rarity had already demonstrated a certain arcane knack. When Rarity finished the scroll, every vibration in the air stilled, and Twilight could only hear the pulse of her own blood. The wall fell in, surreally quiet. She felt the tremors in the floor, but no sound reached her ears. Large stones crushed the flimsy cot, flattening it. Twilight smiled. Seeing the itchy thing destroyed was immensely satisfying. A cloud of dust threw the light from her horn and painted her surroundings in a distorted mix of blue and purple. Twilight sneezed. Blinking, she peered through the dust. Her heart raced when she saw the silhouettes of 2 diamond dogs. For an instant, she was back at the bottom of the shaft, alone with her leg broken.
"They're friends. They must be,"
she told herself, trying to calm her beating heart. Pinkie emerged from the dust and hugged her, her mouth moving as she said something.
"I'd be back,"
she said, sound abruptly returning. Twilight buried her face in Pinkie's curly mane. It smelled like candy, like it always did. She wrapped her forelegs around Pinkie, feeling calm almost instantly.
I wonder what I smell like,
Twilight thought. Pinkie didn't seem to care. As the dust settled, Rarity said,
Thank you, sirs. You've done all I can ask of you.
Twilight watched over Pinkie's shoulder as the Diamond Dogs, a pair of well-muscled brutes, knelt before Rarity.
We can never repay you, Pony,
one said.
You have,
Rarity said with a smile.
Go. Get to the docks, find Captain Fairbreeze. Pull your weight, and he will take you aboard.
Thank you, Pony,
they said in unison, then turned and retreated down a freshly dug tunnel. Twilight disentangled herself from Pinkie and looked down the tunnel leading out of her cell. It descended with a gentle slope, fading into darkness. Wooden supports held the loose earth. Two thick beams flanked the gap in her cell wall and bore the weight of the fortress wall above. A white bunny bounced out of the tunnel, rushed between Twilight's legs, and through the bars of her cell door.
Angel!
Fluttershy cried. Twilight smiled, turning to watch Fluttershy embrace her friend.
How did you get their help?
Twilight asked Rarity.
We set them free.
Rarity said simply.
Now we haven't much time. Some pony must have heard the sound from the digging.
From an assortment of weapons on her back, she levitated Twilight a curved blade in a sheath with a belt coiled around it.
Here, this will have to do if we run into trouble.
Twilight belted on the sword, noting the other weapons Rarity carried. A pair of wing blades and a flail.
Are we leaving?
Rarity stepped forward, unlocking the door to Twilight's cell and swinging it open with ease. She shook her head as she stepped into the corridor beyond.
Oh, heavens, no.
She shot Twilight a grin.
We're getting our things back.
Twilight waited behind Rarity and Pinkie at the base of a spiral staircase. She floated the sword at the ready beside her. It felt weighty and unbalanced. Compared to the sword she was used to, it was little more than a crude club with a sharpened edge. But still, she was glad to have it. The controlled grumbling of an annoyed Pegasus filtered down from above.
I have rank on you, Raindrops. Go check out the weird scraping noises, Raindrops. Why is it always me?
Hoofsteps descended the stairs. Twilight checked behind her. Her group was lined up on the side of a corridor, Fluttershy beside her, with Rainbow and Applejack taking up the rear, wing blades and flail ready. Behind them were 8 cells, 4 of them occupied until recently. A light cast shadows in the corridor as the guard drew closer. When she reached the bottom 2 steps and came into view, Rarity lunged forward. She held the dagger to the Pegasus's throat and her hoof to her lips. Raindrops dropped the lantern in her mouth. It hit the ground with a clang, the flame going out.
If you want to live, you're going to do exactly what I tell you,
Rarity said, her voice icy cold. Raindrop swallowed and nodded, her eyes wide.
How many?
Rarity asked.
4.
Raindrop said.
Well, 3 since I'm down here. A double shift.
She rambled nervously.
Quiet!
Rarity hissed. Hey, Raindrops! Everything okay? A voice called from above.
You're fine. You dropped your lantern,
Rarity whispered.
Tell them. I'm fine. I just dropped my lantern is all.
Raindrops called.
I think it's broken. I'm going to come back up and get a new one,
Rarity whispered.
I think it's broken. I'm going to come up and get another.
Raindrops shouted up the stairs. All right, the voice yelled. Rarity focused intently on Raindrops.
Now, listen to me. We don't want to hurt any pony. But if you make one step out of line, we're going to have to kill you all. The lives of your comrades are in your hooves. I need you to go up those stairs like nothing is amiss. Can you do that, Raindrops? Can you save them?
Raindrops gulped. She eyed Twilight and the others.
I forgot the all-clear code word.
Raindrops called.
It's Cumulus, isn't it?
You had me worried there for a second, the voice shouted. Don't forget the code word.
Good girl,
Rarity whispered with a smile.
Now go on up.
She turned, saying over her shoulder,
Twilight, Pinkie, you're up.
Twilight nodded and cast an invisibility spell. As opposed to the greater invisibility she had been using earlier, this one would be disrupted much more easily, but it was also much less taxing on her resources. She wouldn't be using it long anyway, she hoped. Raindrops watched Twilight disappear with a mixture of fascination and awe written on her face. Rarity flicked her head towards the stairs, and Raindrops dutifully climbed them. Twilight followed, with Pinkie behind her. Between her spell and Pinkie's skill, it sounded like only one pony was climbing the steps. At the top, Raindrops fumbled with a keyring and shakily unlocked a heavy oaken door with a barred window. Laughter filtered from the far side. The door creaked as Raindrops gently swung it open. In the room beyond, 3 ponies sat in uniform, armored only with light chain vests, pushing cards and bits around a table. 2 of them weren't even wearing their wing blades. Raindrops stepped into the room, going to a set of hooks where lanterns hung nearby the table. As soon as Raindrops was close to the others, Twilight cast a sleep spell, and her hooves faded back into existence beneath her. 3 of them dropped instantly. Raindrops and 2 of the guards at the table. One of them managed to hold on to consciousness. He fell out of his chair, struggling to keep his eyes open. Pinkie blazed past Twilight and struck the still awake guard in the temple, disorienting him long enough for the sleep spell to do its work. He slumped against one of the table's legs, out cold.
All clear,
Twilight called. According to Rarity, each cell block had only one stairway leading up, and each stairway had a guard room at the top. Beyond that, the fortress was largely deserted at night, with most of its occupants asleep in their bunks. Minus a couple patrols and 1 soldier headed back from the latrine, she was right. Except for the evidence vault. The 4 guards there met much the same fate as the 4 guards at the top of the stairs, and soon Twilight stood beside Rarity in front of the vault door, 4 unconscious Pegasi sleeping around her. 6 thick steel pins held the door shut, operated by a turning central crank. The locking mechanism was beyond complicated, and Twilight had no idea what purpose half the components served.
Hold this,
Rarity said, highlighting a seemingly innocuous steel bar. Twilight laced her magic around the bar and held it in place while Rarity manipulated several other parts of the mechanism. Something clicked, and Twilight nearly let go of the bar due to a sudden increase in pressure. She strained against it, her horn flaring brighter. The bar creaked and bent. Suddenly, the pressure was gone. Before she could stop, Twilight wrenched the bar. A metallic snap sounded within the mechanism. A moment later, the 6 pins retracted with a pop.
There we go,
Rarity said, grinning with satisfaction.
Good work, Twilight. You should consider being dumb muscle instead of the intelligent leader.
Twilight blinked at Rarity.
What? Is she making fun of me?
She thought.
It was a joke, darling. I'm just saying I couldn't have done it without you.
Rarity chuckled and patted Twilight's shoulder.
Now, let's get this open.
With a push from Rarity, the door swung silently toward them on well-oiled hinges. As soon as it was open a crack, an alarm rang. Twilight wanted to cover her ears with her hooves. A horrible, arcane wail echoed throughout the fortress, pulsing, rising ever higher in pitch until it stopped abruptly. For a brief moment, everything was still and silent, and then the alarm began again. Rarity pushed the door open wide, revealing the interior of the vault. Most of their equipment was arranged on a table in the center.
Hurry!
She shouted, barely audible over the alarm, and rushed forward. Twilight hesitated, her friends following Rarity. Something caught her eye, a sign up a floor and beyond a railing. It conveniently pointed the way to the commander's quarters.
I'll be right back,
she shouted. Then she focused and cast Dimension Door. She appeared beneath the sign. A staircase led back down. To her left, down a short hall, was a door bearing a plaque that read Commander Lightning Dust. She made for the door, the alarm blaring in her ears. The latch wouldn't budge. Locked. She drove the sword through the handle, chipping the blade, and pushed the door open. A desk strewn with papers occupied the center of the room. Bronze Fury's nose ring rested on it beside an inkwell. Lamplight glinted off the golden filigree adorning the chair behind it. In the corner, an armor stand stood, fully outfitted. To her right was a closed door leading to another room. Twilight held her sword ready and stepped into the office. Lightning Dust burst through the door, her mane disheveled. The moment she saw Twilight, she lunged forward, swinging Rainbow's wing blades. A blast of wind hit Twilight and slammed her into the wall. She fell to the floor, battered through her mage armor, but just before Lightning Dust sliced her with a wing, she retaliated in kind, lashing out with her magic. Lightning Dust smashed into the desk, flipped back over it, sent the chair sprawling, and hit the far wall, her unprotected head cracking against the wood. She landed in a broken pile. Twilight picked herself up and slowly approached the unmoving body. With a groan, Lightning Dust shifted. Twilight watched her struggle to rise, the way a cat watches a mouse, a sense of cold detachment falling over her. Her sword, nothing more than a lump of steel, hummed to her, promising blood. She was hungry.
It would be so easy,
she thought. Still, she hesitated, fighting to hold back. The alarm reached its fever pitch, then went silent again. When she was about to let her sword fall, she heard Samponi's hooves in the doorway and whipped around. Rainbow Dash stepped into the room.
What the hell, Twilight? I nearly lost track of you,
she angrily shouted.
I said I'd be right back,
Twilight said, turning back to Lightning Dust.
Well, I didn't hear you,
Rainbow yelled over the alarm as it started back up again.
Besides, we should stick together.
Twilight eyed Lightning Dust.
What do I want to be?
She asked herself. She loosed the straps on the wing blades and roughly pulled them off Lightning Dust's wings. As she passed them to Rainbow, Lightning Dust almost managed to rise.
I wonder if she knows Rainbow just saved her life,
Twilight thought while she picked up Bronze Fury's nose ring from where it had fallen beside the desk.
Let's go,
Twilight shouted and stepped out the door, and nearly ran face first into the backside of a flaming winged soldier, scrambling toward the vault. He turned, his eyes wide, and swung at Twilight with trained precision. Rainbow intervened, parrying the attack. Twilight stepped to the side and flanked the soldier. While Rainbow kept him on the defensive, Twilight aimed to swing at his thigh muscle with the intent to hinder, not kill. She swung hard, knowing that she had to cut through armor with a dull, non-magical blade. He took a step back at precisely the wrong moment. She couldn't stop in time. Her swing contacted chainmail and tore more than cut through his leg, dragging Lynx with it. He collapsed, his leg broken and nearly severed, bleeding profusely. Rainbow watched in horror while blood pooled on the floor of the hallway.
Twilight?
She shouted.
Ah, my nest!
Twilight cried. She stepped forward and touched a hoof to the fallen soldier's thigh, healing him. He'd lose the leg most likely, but at least he wouldn't bleed out. The fortress was alive with activity now. The thunder of hooves accompanied the blaring alarm as soldiers rushed to defend against the intruders. Twilight reached the railing and teleported back down to the vault. Rainbow landed beside her a moment later. "Where'd you two go?" Applejack shouted from inside the vault as she strapped on the last piece of her dragon scale armor.
We got Rainbow's wing blades,
Twilight yelled. Applejack tilted her head at Twilight. "What?" Rarity ripped a narrow rod scribed with arcane runes out of the wall, and the alarm finally went silent.
There we go. We got the wing blades,
Twilight said as she retrieved her swords and strapped them in place, discarding her bloody mundane weapon. "Good. We're about done here," Applejack said. Twilight put on her cloak.
We've got to move.
She looked around for her last important item, the horn ring, before she realized she had had it the entire time. It fit snugly under the suppressor, so it had been hidden from her captors. She wondered what it would be like to cast without the ring.
That's an experiment for another time,
she decided.
Twilight, this is evidence,
Rarity said, exasperated, as she picked up the bloody sword and shoved it into the bag of holding. Twilight cast a haste spell.
All right, let's go,
she said, then stepped out of the vault. The flaming wing were assembled between them and the fortress's main door, at least 20 of them, with more arriving every second. She stopped short. Rarity sped past her.
That's not our exit,
she said as she headed for the cell block. Twilight followed, along with the rest of her friends. "Where are they going?" one of the soldiers shouted. "After them! They got nowhere to go that way!" another yelled. Twilight glanced over her shoulder. Pegasi flew in, blocking the hallway behind. They advanced in formation in the confined space. The gap between her group and their pursuers quickly expanded, the haste spell proving invaluable.
Look out!
Pinkie yelled, and Twilight snapped her gaze forward. A group of 4 flaming wing ponies burst into the hallway ahead of them from a side door. Twilight slowed, preparing to cast a spell, but before she could, Rainbow swept 2 of them aside with blasts of air, and Applejack knocked the other 2 into a pile against a wall with a swing of her chain. Twilight galloped past as they were getting back to their feet. When they reached the cell block, she paused to grease the stairs after they reached the bottom.
That should slow them down,
she thought. She caught up with her group as they reached the tunnel. Rarity waited for her in the opening.
Collapse it,
Rarity said. Twilight nodded and cut the beams with her swords before sprinting down the tunnel beside Rarity. The wall held for a moment, and Twilight looked back, only to see it collapse. A thunderous crash followed them as they descended. A layer of fine gray dust coated Twilight's sweat-slicked fur when they emerged from the rough tunnel into a wide masoned passage. She blinked dust from her eyes and tried to spit it out of her dry mouth. She had been collapsing the tunnel as they went. In one direction, the passage curved gently away, perfectly level. In the other, it ended in a cave-in. A pile of dirt had been built beside the mouth of the tunnel, Twilight coughed.
How long did it take to dig?
She asked.
Not long,
Pinkie had replied.
with 2 diamond dogs, about 8 hours. Now, do you need a drink?
Twilight nodded, and Rarity produced from her pack the bag of holding. After settling the saddlebags on her back, Twilight took a long swig from her water skin. Swallowing, she peered at the walls around them. The stones were cut to fit almost perfectly together. "What is this place?" Applejack asked, brushing her hoof against one of the walls. Pinkie grinned.
Smuggler's Way! A side passage, to be specific, mostly unused.
Rarity elaborated. Twilight sagged, lying down by the wall. She had let go of the haste spell when it was no longer needed, and now her muscles burned. Her stomach knotted, a reminder that she hadn't had anything to eat besides a bit of bread since she was captured. She opened her pack and discarded a rotten apple.
What have we got to eat?
She asked.
I'm starving.
Rainbow said, plopping down on her haunches beside Twilight.
I couldn't eat a bite of that gruel.
I managed a little, Applejack said, but I'm pretty hungry too.
Have some oats?
Fluttershy said while rummaging around in her pack.
Oh, and I'm hungry too. Well, come on then.
Rarity beckoned from down the passage.
There will be food on the way, I promise.
Twilight munched on oats while she walked, the echoes of every pony's hooves surrounding her.
So,
She said around a mouthful.
you named this place, but what is it? To tell you the truth, I don't actually know.
Rarity said.
These tunnels are a relic of old Manhattan, from before the time of troubles. Most of them are collapsed or flooded, but there is one that runs from the docks to the heart of the city that's still open. It's called Smuggler's Way, and we'll be coming up on it soon.
Doesn't seem like it'd be much good for smuggling if the Flamin' Wing know about it. I guess they don't come down here? Applejack said.
Indeed. It's a closely guarded guild secret. Well, that and bribes keep the law enforcement out.
Rarity said. Applejack nodded in understanding.
What guild?
Twilight asked. Rarity shot a sidelong smile at Twilight.
Why, the Thieves' Guild, of course. Did you grow up under a rock?
Twilight rolled her eyes.
No, behind a wall. I didn't read about them in any books. Well, I mean, now that I think about it, I can remember them being mentioned in passing, but I never realized they were so prevalent. I rather like to think they like to keep it that way.
Rarity said.
They?
Twilight asked.
So you're not part of the guild? Sort of. I was a part of it. But once you're in the Thieves' Guild, you don't really leave.
Rarity said. Pinkie nudged Applejack in the ribs.
Once a thief, always a thief, eh, AJ?
Applejack's ears swiveled back. Sure.
Hey, you ate that stolen bread too.
Rainbow said.
Ooh, you ate something stolen?
Pinkie said.
Juicy. Guess that makes you a thievin' thiefy thief, Applejack.
Applejack sighed in exasperation. Fine, I admit it. I was a bit too harsh on the stealing thing. Sometimes there's a good reason for it. That don't make it right, though. Twi, if we get the chance, we should pay that baker back. Twilight nodded.
If I can, I'll pay them back, window and all.
Twilight's hoof struck something metal then, and she stumbled forward, spilling oats as she struggled to regain her balance. She winced and lifted her injured hoof while she looked for what she had run into. She found a thick metal bar with a T-shaped cross-section lying on the floor of the passage. Out of curiosity, she picked it up, inspecting it, She could make out the faint lines of what were once arcane runes. Her eyes went wide as the realization dawned on her.
This is the tramway! The what now?
Rainbow asked.
Manhattan used to have a tramway that could take ponies from one end of the island to the other in a matter of minutes using arcane cars.
Twilight explained.
This tunnel was once a part of it. It's real.
She felt like one of her favorite scholars recounting the story of how they stumbled on proof of an ancient relic.
The magical implications alone are fascinating,
she said.
Oh, I can't wait to tell Crystal Clear about this.
You can't tell her, Twilight,
Rarity said.
What? Why not?
Twilight asked, incredulous.
Because then I would have betrayed the trust of the Thieves Guild, and I don't want that to happen,
Rarity said. Twilight dejectedly dropped the bar and stared at it.
Right,
she said. She looked up at Rarity a moment later.
Wait. Crystal Clear, is she all right?
She's fine,
Rarity said.
The Flaming Wing let her and her group go when they found nothing tying them to us.
Twilight sighed with relief. The line they were on soon curved into another. The bustle of voices reached Twilight's ears long before they made it around the bend. When they reached the other line, Smuggler's Way, Twilight saw ponies traveling to and fro, pulling carts full of exotic goods. It was twice as wide as the tunnel that ran under the Flaming Wing prison, and as busy as a city street. Rarity stopped them before they reached the traffic. She held out the bag of holding.
Put anything valuable in here, or you won't have it by the time we get where we're going.
All of their cloaks, with the exception of Fluttershy's, and she insisted on wearing it, and with Angel on her back protecting it, it would be safe, went into the bag, along with a few of the more accessible pieces of Applejack's armor, Rarity's bow, and any coin they had. Twilight considered, then added Solstice to the bag. She was confident she could keep anyone from stealing one of her swords, but not both. When Applejack fished the spike out of her bag, Rarity eyed it with interest.
Does that go on the end of your chain?
She asked.
Yep. I was hoping to find a blacksmith that could reforge it in this city,
Applejack said.
I might know how to get it fixed,
Rarity said as she slipped the spike into the bag of holding.
We'll deal with that later, though.
She passed the bag to Applejack, tucking it under her breastplate.
Now, I am trusting you to keep that safe.
Applejack nodded, and with that, Rarity turned to the corner and slipped into the traffic. Twilight followed Rarity. Their group stayed tight, occupying a space between two carts. Still, a couple strangers brushed against her as they wove through traffic. An unseen unicorn tried to steal her sword, but Twilight kept an overwhelming grip on it. Within a few minutes, Twilight was entertaining the thought of wasting the crowd with a fireball so that she could continue on in some peace. Before long, the passage widened out even more, makeshift wooden steps on either side leading up onto elevated platforms. She stared up at the vaulted ceiling.
A station,
she realized, awestruck by the sheer size of the artificial cavern. Rarity led them onto one of the platforms. Above the traffic, vendors hawked their wares.
I don't get it,
Twilight said, twirling 2 sticks in a bowl of noodle soup as she looked around the platform.
Oh, chopsticks are quite simple once you get the hang of them, really,
Rarity said between mouthfuls of noodle.
No, I got that. I don't get how so many ponies can be down here and it be any kind of a secret. Isn't one of them bound to sell out?
Twilight asked. She lifted the bowl to her lips and hungrily scooped some noodles into her mouth. It was supposed to be some sort of foreign delicacy, but to Twilight the broth tasted like salty water with a hint of spice and shrimp. But it was full of delicious noodles that filled her belly.
And why can't I tell Crystal Clear?
She asked after swallowing. Rarity sighed.
It's not so much that no pony knows about it. It's more like the officials in charge of law enforcement, the ponies that pay the Flaming Wing, can deny that it exists.
She pulled a bunch of noodles rotated around her chopsticks out of the bowl.
If a scholar like Crystal Clear published what you discovered, there would be no end of them poking around down here. Sooner or later, the ponies that the Thieves Guild bribes wouldn't be able to plausibly deny the existence of Manhattan's underground any longer, and I would be to blame.
She popped the noodles into her mouth. Twilight shrugged.
She wouldn't publish if I told her not to.
Rarity raised an eyebrow at Twilight.
Are you sure about that? How well do you know her? She is ambitious, for one. She might even steal your discovery, given the opportunity.
She wouldn't. She's not that ambitious.
Twilight argued.
Then why did she come out of retirement for this whole Crystal Princess thing?
Rarity asked.
Professional curiosity,
Twilight argued. Applejack looked up from her bowl of soup.
Look, I'm sure this is a fascinating conversation you're having about fancy unicorn cutlery, bribery, and academic backstabbing, but I'd like to eat, get whatever we're going, and get some sleep, so clam up and eat up.
Rainbow tipped back her bowl with her hooves, slurping it down.
Done. How far is it, anyway?
Pinkie finished off her bowl and thunked it down on the table they were sitting around.
Finished.
She glanced at Rainbow's empty roll.
Aw, you beat me.
Not far from here.
Rarity said. She pointed a hoof at the ceiling.
There's an exit up there near where we're headed.
Fluttershy toyed with her food, not eating.
So, there's really shrimp in here?